As mentioned in the intro, civil rights groups, human rights groups have criticized this very strongly. On the other hand, Republicans in the person of the Cheneys, Kit Bond and others have criticized the Obama administration nonetheless for starting a witch hunt of Bush administration officials, which clearly isn't the case. But as you saw in this lobbying group that the Cheneys have now set up, the Republicans see rich political ground to be harvested in these issues. And this goes back really to 3 months after the attacks of 9/11, when Karl Rove stood up before the Republican National Committee and said, Americans trust us to protect the country. You know, we can win on this terrorism issue. And indeed, for 2 elections, they did win. And the Cheneys are now really trying to set up the Obama administration as an administration that's weak, democratic weakness, renouncing torture, renouncing the techniques that supposedly are needed to protect the country. And I think there's a very calculated strategy at work here, particularly in the event of another attack. That is, the Obama administration is being put in a position where if there is an attack on the country, it can be very vigorously blamed by the Republicans for leaving the country open to the attack by its supposed refusal to torture detainees. And we see another side of this in the debate over Afghanistan, where Republicans are very harshly criticizing the administration for its hesitation in not sending the full complement of 40,000 troops that General McChrystal has reportedly recommended. So you're seeing on both sides this kind of preparation to undermine the administration in the event of a further attack, that it has left the country vulnerable, as of course Democrats do in the Republican worldview. So all of this, you know, President Obama, with all due respect, keeps talking about not wanting to look in the past, but in fact the torture issue is not about the past, it's about the present, very much so, and our national security. It has very strong symbolic resonance among the American public. It isn't simply about what the Bush administration did, it's about what the Obama administration is doing and what it stands for. And the Democrats have taken, I think, a somewhat typical middle-of-the-road position that leaves them vulnerable and pleases no particular constituency at all.
And Mark, I want you to expand on your notion of the frozen scandal. We've all known that this country has been torturing for over 4 years now. These revelations came out, starting with Abu Ghraib. But you talk about this as a frozen scandal, where each time there's a new revelation, there's a new round of shock, but then what happens next?
Well, it's true, as you say, that we've known about these things for a long time. The first major press report on stress and duress techniques, as it was called then, was on the front page of the Washington Post in December 2002. The New York Times reported on waterboarding in 2004 in May. There was a rush of documents that came out, as you point out, in the wake of Abu Ghraib. I published a book on this in October 2004, which is about 600 pages. It was called Torture and Truth, and 2/3 of it were government documents that described this stuff in great detail. So we like to think that our scandals are about revelation, which is to say, once you hear about something, my God, the society jolts to attention, the judicial and congressional machinery leaps into action. There are investigations, there's punishment, and so on. And that has not happened. Actually, there's been revelation, have been gestures toward investigation. In the case of Abu Ghraib, a few lower-level soldiers have been imprisoned, prosecuted and imprisoned. But the actual policymakers, whose decisions we know about in great detail, we have these memos that Department of Justice officials wrote. We have an immense amount of material, thousands and thousands of pages, describing in great detail how the decisions were made to use torture. We have the Red Cross report, which I published last spring, which describes these techniques in great detail, how they were used, what sequence they were used in. We have the Justice Department and CIA document describing how they were used. All this stuff is out there. And we like to think what prevents action is lack of information. But in fact, it's not information, it's politics. And politics at this point have determined that we, in effect, as a society, decided not only to torture, but to live with torture. That has been our decision up to now. And I think we tend to console ourselves that this is a continuing scandal and there's a controversy about it. But in fact, though we talk about it a lot, the decisions on the part of the government have been made and in a real sense, unchallenged. None of the people who made the policies have been prosecuted and even investigated. And the decisions have not been formally renounced, though Obama has said he will not use these anymore, and I believe him. Torture, in fact, has gone from being an anathema, something forbidden and illegal under U.S. law and international conventions, to being a policy choice. In effect, for example, if there's another attack, the government can go back to using it. I mean, it's essentially been defined as legal under the Convention Against Torture and under U.S. law.
Iraq. Fit Iraq into this story, as you do in Stripping Bare the Body, talking about it, as many do now in the past, although the U.S. has a full presence there right now. A war is being waged.
Well, it's an amazing American proclivity, I think, to look at a particular place, direct its imperial gaze there. The elite learns all about the country. We debate what's going on in Mosul and Karbala and so on. The knowledge and the argument is furious for a few years, and then suddenly the gaze shifts elsewhere. It's like a spotlight that goes now to Afghanistan and leaves Iraq, formerly brightly lit, in darkness. And we tend to leave ruins behind. And Iraq, I think, is a very good example of that, that suddenly it's gone. We can define it, if we want to, as a success. That is the way it's talked about very often in the national press, one way or another. And in fact, of course, it remains an extremely violent place. The insurgency still exists. The United States essentially tamped it down for a time by renting the insurgency, by dividing it and hiring a good many of what we seem to refer to as the tribes, a very odd expression, but Sunni organizations in the center of the country. It is, as I say, there is still a very significant level of violence there, but for reasons having to do, I think, with Obama's ascension mainly, and the current political struggle over Afghanistan, what will be done there, we don't talk about it anymore. It's just left the national scene.
And what do you think needs to be said about it right now?
Well, I think one of the things I would like to say about it is that it is somewhat a lesson in how we make decisions and our national evangelism, our conviction that seems to be ignited from time to time that the United States, with all its great power, I put that in quotes, can alter for its own good a society that's distant, complex, difficult to understand, and that has its own particular political strengths and dysfunctions. I'm always astonished by how we talk about other countries. We're doing it now with Afghanistan, that, actually it's a political problem. We have to nation build. There was a piece in the front page of the New York Times in the last few days that talked about nation building going too slowly in Afghanistan, and it always leaves me a bit breathless to look at this idea that, if you've ever seen foreign aid actually at work on the ground, you can't do these things. You can't change societies on this scale, particularly since U.S. intervention, it's like trying to fix a watch in your own shadow, because you have the shadow of nationalism, which is to say every bit of U.S. forces that actually are on the ground cause their own, very often extreme political reaction. So it's impossible. It's kind of an indeterminacy principle. You cannot intervene without a strong reaction, and very often a very strong reaction. And both of these societies, the Iraqi and the Afghani, have in common the fact that they're strongly nationalistic and react very powerfully to outside intervention. And the fact that we saw this in spades in Iraq seems not to be recalled in any way during the debate about Afghanistan, which is being carried on, it seems to me, largely because of domestic political reasons that stem in large part from decisions the Obama campaign made